Last but certainly not least on the panel is Professor Mallika Joseph, the Senior Fellow with WISCOMP and Visiting Fellow at the Center for Policy Research. She serves as Adjunct Professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore. And she's previously served as a policy advisor and regional coordinator for the Asia Pacific at GPAC, the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. She was professor and chair of the Department of National Security Studies at the Central University of Jammu, and as executive director, Regional Center for Strategic Studies, RCSS, where she followed her mentor, General Dipankar Banerjee, and and took on a role which was really difficult but a very, very sort of compellingly engaging. So she has worked in mediation with mediation groups, and we've been speaking about the mediators, the Mediterranean Mediators Network, and it would be very interesting to hear your views, Mallika, that given that women are largely absent from the formal mediation space, what kind of skills they bring, and what have been your own examples from Southeast Asia, perhaps Asia Pacific, yeah, and South Asia. It'd be most useful for us. And thank you. I didn't mention the long list of publications, but it's there in your folders. And so over to you, Mallika. Thank you for your patience and waiting so patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a privilege to actually put forward some of my thoughts in such an August gathering. So my few points that I'm making today actually is informed by my long-term association with the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, Hague-based, which is supported by the Dutch government as well as CEDA. And that's kind of informed more about the peace process and conflict, but also the long association with WISCOM has informed about the role of women peace builders, particularly in South Asia, but also the Asia Pacific. So I thank you for that. So what I intend to do is I'll flag just few points about the few features of women peace builders, what they bring to the table and how they impacted by it, some barriers. Some of them have already been discussed earlier. And then I'll probably take a moment to share about the recent opportunity I had to have a ringside view of the latest reconciliation process that's happening in Sri Lanka, which was we mediated, and it's happening. I mean, last week, those of you who have been following Sri Lanka would have seen a buzz. I mean, a lot of news things, so I was happy to be part of that facilitation process. So I'll just share it. So one element which already people have highlighted to is women's participation enhances the peace process. A lot of statistics, Happy mentioned it, also the ambassador. But the second thing is women peace builders also introduce alternate paradigms of peace. And this is something very key. What is it, how men perceive peace and as well as how women do it, because for men, most often it is the end of the conflict for a peace process. But for women, it is end of violence. As a result of which, when you even you may have a peace process in place, but then if you ask women how they feel about peace, they would say that peace has still been elusive for them because of this different notion of how they see peace as end of violence rather than end of conflict. And then also the other feature that I found is most of the women's participations get stuck at the local grassroots level. They are rarely able to go beyond that, and this could be for various reasons, and that's how they get left out of the formal processes. One such thing is the structural barriers, which a lot of speakers alluded to as well, how the family doesn't allow them to engage beyond the community level itself. So they are happy to let their women do a bit of mediation and negotiation at the community level, in churches, in schools, and all of that. But beyond that, there is no formal way in which they can engage. And also the other end, you have very practical problems of money. Most of these formal peace processes happen at capitals or in another country, which local peace building communities are unable to go unless there is somebody else who can offer that support to get them engaged in that. So that is one other aspect I want to flag. And also what happens and how do actually women get left out of peace process, which actually they have started at the local level. because even though they start the process, when the actual pre-process or pre-negotiation happens, it eventually ends up being between the primary parties to the conflict. So there are technical decisions on demilitarization and most of those things. So as a result, they believe that women are no longer needed in that part of the conversation, so they proceed with that. So once women get left out of the pre-negotiation process, they're also left out of the formal drafting of the peace negotiations itself, which basically define the power structures which will come in the post-conflict situation. So they get left out on that. And then following the peace negotiations, formal ones, you also have the implementation phase. But because women have been formally left out on the earlier two process, they get missed out on the following ones as well. And even with the big push for women's formal participation and recognition of the role in 1325 and all the other international frameworks we have, we still find more of a tokenism, just as MG mentioned, add women and stir, and they're unable to actually influence or change the agenda. That is still true. And unless, and one of the peace builders mediators actually pointed out that unless they are personally politically connected to those who are negotiating and brokering it peace, unless they are connected even to be a token member or participation, they are not called in. So that is how they are far removed from the decision making process within the formal peace process itself. And I also find that there's a big disconnect between women peace builders who are there at the grassroots level and women who are engaged in peace building narratives, shaping the global agenda at a very at the policy level and at the global level. Though at the policy level they do every efforts, like we had the DCM mentioning about how they try to bridge this gap between the local and the global, but still there is a pronounced disconnect that is there. So that is one observation. And last, and I think the biggest barrier that I also notice is the narrative of women as victims is something which is so foregrounded when you talk about women in conflict, that so the focus is on what the conflict is doing to women rather than what are actually women doing to the conflict. So that conversation gets like totally silenced by the victim thing, because it is immense. We can't brush it aside. It is still there. It's a reality. So this is why it gets missed out. Finally, just a minute on the reconciliation process that started in Sri Lanka. We started it. It started last year, but then the actual negotiation mediation happened in April this year. It was between two extreme parties within the Tamil and Sinhala group, which was the monks at one end and the Tamil diasporas at the other. And they are, whoever has a background on Sri Lanka, they'll know they are considered the spoilers. So it was very difficult. No one would see eye to eye. But we did have an opportunity of positive, where they wanted to, there was a positive signal. So it was brought together by the AWAW, which is the Association for War-Affected Women. And and it's surprising that in such a patriarchal society like Sri Lanka, it was AWAW which actually had the credibility and the convening ability to bring these two parties together. And what was even more fascinating is when we got into the mediation and negotiation, there was no talk, though we listed out what were the issues that were affecting both parties. Very quickly, the discussion turned down to issues relating to fear, to mistrust, and dignity. It was not about, reconciliation was there, truth was there, how to find about missing people, all those issues were there. But at the core of it, we identified it was mistrust and the need for dignity. How does everybody? So I think these were like very significant ways in which women peace builders are able to foreground different aspect, soft security issues to deal with that. And we also dealt with issues like you had things like the Desavamani law, which people thought was not in favor of the Sinhala, so they were very against it. So those issues were dispelled, mistrust was dispelled. Things relating to the archaeological site conflict that you're having right now, where the Buddhists say that the archaeological sites, Buddhist archaeological sites which are found in the northern areas belong to the Buddhists, The Tamils claim no, there were Tamil Buddhists, and those sites belong to them, and so it needs to be with them. So things like that they've been having. We were able to foster those conversation between the Buddhist monks as well as the Tamils. So right now we after about like 8 months of active work on the ground, now they've been able to come out in the open, and now they've met the president, they've met all the other Buddhist monks, the Mahasangh and all of them. So we are hoping, still the process is not in the clear, because we still have a lot of spoilers within the monks as well as within the diaspora who can derail this reconciliation process. But we hope that it can get more mainstream. One final point that I wanted to talk about, the women, role of women peace builders. In all the photographs, in all the news items that have come about the reconciliation, you will find the delegation of the diaspora members as well as the monks with the president and all of them. And you will see Visakha, who actually brought these people together. You will see her standing there, but you don't find her name, her organization mentioned in any of the news reports, in any of it, right? And she herself wouldn't also want to push for it, because the larger purpose is to see how the process, reconciliation process, can take root. So I think that also is like one of the reason why the role that women play in the peace process or negotiations, they are wanting to look at the final outcome, how they can achieve it, rather than say that whether they will get their recognition for it. So that is something I don't know whether we can actually change, because we all want a better peace process, something which can last. I'll stop there now.
Thank you very much indeed, Mallika. You brought the whole conversation back to issues of justice and trust deficit. And a very important aspect, that two important aspects that you foregrounded that was not part of our deliberations, is how the appropriation of historical sites has become such an integral part. It's also performative, and it's also, and in South Asia, we see this being played out. The second aspect is that sometimes women's groups are able to stay below the radar, and their anonymity renders them much more effective. I think you know WISCOM's work in Kashmir. Not that we've succeeded, if you can see things, but that was a deliberate choice to stay below the radar and not talk about the dramatic changes that have happened because of intervention. I think that's something that women can bring, which is not really available. But thank you so much. You have this great ability to compress so much in such a short period of time. And I think AWAW's approach itself is using indigenous language, and end of the day also the mother's, the icon of motherhood is also somewhere embedded in their approach. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but leave it at that.